Hey everybody, it's Dan, and welcome back to Nocones Garage. On this episode, we're going to build the rear part of the chassis, up to the chassis bungs. These bungs are going to allow us to disconnect the rear subframe so we can work on the engine and remove it from the car easily.
At this point I continued to add tubes to reinforce this upper node. This node was going to be where the upper bung to the rear subframe and the rear stay for the main hoop attached. It was pointed out to me that the way that the chassis is designed at this intersection doesn't necessarily meet the inertia trace specs. I'll get into that in a little more detail, but for now, this meant was I had to cut out this part of the chassis and restart using the 2-inch tube that I had used for the lower chassis.
So we're going to put these weld nuts, captive nuts on the back. And one problem that you have is your hole's a little bigger, and no matter how you try to align it, you tend to get it offset a little bit. And when that happens, the bolts can be really hard to put in. So what we're going to do is just take the lathe and just cut a little bit off. You can see on the end of a bolt or a nut, there's a little bit of a taper before the threads start. So we'll only cut there, that way the first thread is still intact. And then when you insert that, it aligns it perfectly, and you just weld it from the back. So these parts are just some parts that I cut off of the first version of this back section. So I just cut them and trimmed the ends to fit. And so they just fit back in the same way they were originally supposed to. So that's going to do it for this episode. Locating these 6 subframe chassis bungs is a really good stopping point. Before we do finish, I do want to talk briefly about the rear half of the chassis that we fabricated. So I originally fabricated this portion all out of 1-inch tube with a plate gusset up here. Prior to cutting this tube, someone pointed out that the NRHA specs actually call for a tubular chassis like this, that this node has to terminate at a 2x2 piece. So I had to cut out some work I had already done and rebuild it with this. I think the end result is a little bit better. It gave more clearance for this bung to have its nut plate welded right in this node, which I liked. And overall, this 2x2 is stiffer. The total cost per foot of this tube is not actually that much more than this 1x. And it doesn't add that much weight. It's only a little bit, about twice the weight of a piece of 1x for substantially more stiffness. So overall, I'd say it's a win. When you're building vehicles like this, mistakes do happen, especially when the whole car isn't actually built in CAD beforehand. We're kind of building it on the fly. So as always, thanks for watching, and join us next time as we start work on the rear subframe. Better rear. Tape measure. Why do you always run away? There you are.